It was late at night when Emma decided to run to the convenience store down the street to grab some snacks. She had just moved to a new town and didn't know anyone yet, but she felt safe enough to make the quick trip alone. As she walked down the deserted street, she felt a chill run down her spine. She shook it off, thinking it was just the cold, but the feeling persisted. As she reached the store, she saw a man standing outside, smoking a cigarette. He looked up as she approached, and Emma noticed his dark, brooding eyes. She hesitated for a moment, but she needed those snacks, so she entered the store. As she perused the aisles, she realized that she was the only customer in the store. The cashier, an older man with a stern expression, stood behind the counter, watching her every move. Emma tried to shake off the creepy feeling that was starting to take over. She grabbed her snacks and headed to the counter to pay. But as she handed over her money, the cashier's expression changed. He looked at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She quickly grabbed her snacks and headed for the door. As she stepped outside, she saw the man who had been smoking earlier was now standing closer to the door. She tried to hurry past him, but he grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Hey, pretty lady, where are you headed?" he asked, a sinister smile on his face. Emma tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. Suddenly, the cashier appeared behind her, blocking her path. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold and menacing. Emma's heart raced as she realized that she was in danger. She looked around for an escape, but the two men were blocking her path. Suddenly, the lights in the store flickered, and the two men disappeared. Emma was left alone in the dark, empty store. She quickly made her way to the door and stepped outside, but she was met with a scene that made her heart race even faster. The street was now lined with shadowy figures, their faces twisted into grotesque shapes. Emma tried to run, but the figures closed in around her, trapping her in a circle of darkness. She screamed for help, but no one came. Just as she was about to give up hope, a figure stepped forward from the shadows. It was a young girl with long, dark hair and a haunted expression. She reached out her hand to Emma, offering her a way out. Emma hesitated for a moment, but she had no other choice. She took the girl's hand, and suddenly everything went black. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in her bed, drenched in sweat. It was all just a nightmare. But as she sat up, she noticed a dark figure standing in the corner of her room. It was the same girl from her dream, and she was holding something in her hand. Emma realized with horror that it was a small silver key. The girl spoke softly, her voice barely audible. "You'll need this," she said, before disappearing into the darkness. Emma sat there, clutching the key, wondering what it unlocked. She knew that she would have to find out, but she was terrified of what she might discover. As she stepped outside, she saw the same man who had been smoking earlier standing at the end of the street. But this time, he was smiling. "You shouldn't have taken the key," he said, before disappearing into the darkness. Emma knew that she was in danger. She arrived home exhausted after her ordeal in the small town. She felt relieved to be back in her own apartment and away from the darkness that had consumed her in the town. But as she unpacked her bags, she noticed a strange feeling in her chest. It was a tightness that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. She tried to ignore it, but it only got worse. Soon she was gasping for air and clutching at her chest in pain. Emma knew what was happening. The townspeople had gotten to her. They had poisoned her, and now she was dying. She collapsed on the floor, unable to move or breathe. The pain was unbearable, but she was resigned to her fate. As she took her last breath, she thought about the silver key that she had fought so hard to protect. She knew that it would continue to be a source of pain and suffering for anyone who tried to uncover the truth. Emma died alone on the floor of her apartment, a victim of the small town's dark secrets. It was just another day at work for Sarah. She had a busy schedule, and she was already running late for her meeting on the top floor of the building. She quickly stepped into the elevator, but as she pressed the button for her floor, the elevator suddenly jerked and came to a halt. Sarah looked around and realized that she wasn't alone. There were 5 other people in the elevator with her. They all seemed to be in a state of panic, and Sarah could feel the tension building. After a few minutes of trying to fix the elevator, it became clear that they were stuck. Panic began to set in as the group realized they were trapped. As they waited for help to arrive, strange things started to happen. The lights in the elevator flickered and went out. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the corner of the elevator, but it wasn't one of the passengers. The figure was a woman in a tattered dress, with long, unkempt hair. She looked at the passengers with hollow eyes, and they all felt a sense of unease. The woman spoke in a raspy voice, "I've been waiting for you all." The passengers tried to keep calm, but as time passed, the woman became more and more aggressive. She would lash out at them, and they would cower in fear. As the hours passed, the group realized that there was something different about the woman. She wasn't alive. She was a ghost, trapped in the elevator with them. The passengers tried to find a way out, but it was no use. They were stuck, and the ghost was getting stronger by the minute. It was clear that the ghost had a vendetta against them, but they had no idea why. After what felt like an eternity, the elevator finally started moving again. The passengers were relieved, but their relief was short-lived. As they stepped out of the elevator, they realized that they had been transported to a different dimension. The world around them was dark and eerie, and they were completely alone. The group soon realized that they had been brought to this world by the ghost. She had trapped them there, and there was no escape. As they looked around, they saw the ghost in the distance. She had a sinister smile on her face as she watched them. The group knew then that they were doomed, trapped in this world with the vengeful ghost. And so the group remained trapped in the dark world, tormented by the ghost for eternity. They were never seen or heard from again. Melanie was an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. That is until she started seeing a shadow following her everywhere she went. At first, she thought it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But as the days went by, the shadow became more and more real. It was a dark figure that would appear out of nowhere and follow her every move. Melanie tried to tell her friends and family, but they didn't believe her. They thought she was just going crazy. As time went on, the shadow began to take on a life of its own. It would move things around the house, open and close doors, and even speak to her in a deep, menacing voice. Melanie knew she had to find a way to get rid of the shadow before it was too late. She tried everything she could think of, from seeking help from a priest to researching ancient rituals, but nothing worked. Melanie was an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. That is until she started seeing a shadow following her everywhere she went. At first, she thought it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But as the days went by, the shadow became more and more real. It was a dark figure that would appear out of nowhere and follow her every move. Melanie tried to tell her friends and family, but they didn't believe her. They thought she was just going crazy. As time went on, the shadow began to take on a life of its own. It would move things around the house, open and close doors, and even speak to her in a deep, menacing voice. Melanie knew she had to find a way to get rid of the shadow before it was too late. She tried everything she could think of, from seeking help from a priest to researching ancient rituals, but nothing worked. One night, as Melanie lay in bed, she heard the shadow's voice calling out to her. It told her that it was not just a figment of her imagination, but a manifestation of her deepest fears and desires. The shadow revealed to her that it had always been with her, lurking in the shadows of her mind. It had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself, and now that it had, it would never leave her alone. Melanie realized with horror that the shadow was right. It was a part of her, and it would always be there, haunting her every move. In a fit of desperation, Melanie took her own life, hoping that in death she could escape the shadow's grasp. But as she took her last breath, the shadow consumed her, taking over her body and soul. The shadow had won, and it would continue to haunt and torment others, feeding off their fears and desires, just as it had done with Melanie. No one would ever know the true horror that had taken place, as the shadow continued to lurk in the darkness, waiting for its next victim.